Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Let's give us a few seconds as I see people are slowly logging in. Yes, I'm very happy to welcome everybody. My name is Eleonora Mura and I'm joining from Arigato International, and I really have the honor to be moderating this discussion today. I see people are slowly logging in. So meanwhile, a couple of housekeeping rules. I know we are all Zoom senior users here, but please keep yourself muted. Also, no need to open your cameras as only the speakers will be spotlighted. We have interpretation today available in Spanish. So just please click down in the bottom of your screen and you can hear from our interpreter in Spanish. Also, we would like for everyone to use the chat function to introduce yourself, telling us from where you are connecting. We had an incredible number of people registered for today's session, so we would like to learn a little bit more about you. And please also use the Q&A session for asking any questions that you would like for our speakers today to explain and to discuss more. We're gonna have a Q&A session after the first presentations. So this being said, welcome everyone. I believe everybody now has joined in. Today's webinar is really helping us to understand better how the nurture of spiritual development is a central part of the child development and how this happens in the early years, contributing to sound and holistic development. So we're also going to connect the nurturing of child spirituality to the broader evidence and the frameworks that have been developed in the latest year. And we're gonna to really explore the shared and strengthen the shared understanding among different stakeholders. We're very privileged today. We have a varieties of views coming from different academic and practitioners' perspective. So I think and I hope you will all enjoy the conversation and the different contributions to the nurturing of spiritual development in the early years that this is going to bring. I think without further ado, as the agenda is intense and we have 90 minutes, I'm very happy to give the floor to our keynote speaker today, Dr. Jennifer Wortham from the Harvard Human Flourishing Program. The full bios will be shared in the chat, so I won't be speaking more about Dr. Jennifer, but I think when you read her bio in the chat, you will learn more about her. And I will jump directly into her keynote address that is going to be sharing from us the perspective of the Harvard Human Flourishing Program, but also how the current research is going about the relationship between spirituality and the outcomes on development, such as resilience, relationship, and well-being. So please, Dr. Jennifer, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. And can we see the screen?
Yes, I can see your screen now. You can start sharing the presentation. I cannot see.
Thank you, everyone. Well, welcome today. I actually have two roles now. I am the president and CEO of the Society for Global Flourishing, which is a new organization that we launched about 2 months ago to help advance the science and practice of flourishing across the globe. And then I also have an academic appointment at Harvard as a research associate. Been with them since 2020. So very excited to be here today. I want to say a little bit about the Human Flourishing Program. The Human Flourishing Program is embedded within the Institute for Quantitative and Social Science. The aim is to really study and promote the human flourishing and to develop systematic approaches to how we synthesize all the knowledge across disciplines. So we have a very eclectic group with lots of different disciplines are embedded within the program, and so we can look at things from multiple perspectives, from theology to philosophy to public health, ethics, child development. It really runs the gamut. So it's been a really great experience, and share a little bit about the global flourishing studies. So in 2020, 2023, we launched the first wave of the Global Flourishing Study. It is um, uh, probably the largest study of its kind, very ambitious study looking at 200,000 respondents over 5 years in 22 plus countries. And we just published last year a special edition within the Nature. I think it's you can see here there's a website that you can access if you're interested, or you can just go to the Global Flourishing Study website and download information or get access to all the papers. But to date, we have over 1,000 papers published on this study. So it's a very robust study. Lots of really good information. This study follows individuals that are 18 and over. So we'll be talking about the next steps in a little bit later. So I'm going to run through the pathways to flourishing. All this work kind of emerged from some early work Tyler Vanderwill did. This was a presentation at the National Academy of Sciences in 2017. Dr. Vanderwill is a biostatistician and epidemiologist, and has just extensive experience in public health research. And so the Global Flourishing Study really looks at 6 domains. There's two different ways we classify the index that we've developed. One is called the Secure Flourishing Index, which incorporates also a financial domain. When that's admitted, we just call it the Flourishing Index. But the domains cover what we call happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose,
Dr.
character.
Jennifer, sorry, we cannot see the presentation, so if you could reshare.
Okay,
Mhm.
sorry about that. We had it up there a little bit ago. Let's see.
Yes, we did.
Um, can we see it now?
It's loading. Just a second. Yes, now we see the pathways to flourishing. Yes, thank you.
Okay, there you go. Yep. Can you see it?
Yes, perfect. Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So the pathway, and I think we'll be downloading this as well or posting it so people can see it, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So the pathways to flourishing include happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, and close social relationships. We study this across family, work, education, and religious communities. So there's relationships in all of these areas. Um, so the Global Flourishing Study findings, the study really found some unique variations in flourishing across different dimensional constructs. And so when we look at different countries, flourishing is manifesting in different ways, which was really an interesting finding. As we know from the literature, childhood has a significant impact on the life course and flourishing overall. So when we look at all the data from the floor, there's multiple what we call childhood predictors, and so this is a retrospective view, self-reported of individuals' experiences in childhood. And so when we look at those predictors, there are significant correlations in with your long-term outcomes. Young people, it's interesting, in many countries are not flourishing today. And so we're doing a much deeper dives and trying to understand why that is. We found, just as a side, religious service attendance is very strongly associated with well-being across countries and outcomes. So again, there are 40 questions in the study, 40, I think 42 questions, and it's over 5 years. We're going into our fourth year now of study, but there's over 1,000 papers that have been published. There's a very deep body of research that you can see, but I just pulled up a few select findings. So our next step is to really move forward and looking at child faith and flourishing across hopefully the same, at least 20 countries. We're looking at potentially a 10-year horizon to do this research and to really have a deeper dive into what spiritual formation is amongst children, how religion and how various practices influence um, the child flourishing, and really understand it from different contexts and cultures at a very deep level. And so this is going to be consisting of both observational research and interviews. And we're going to be launching the pilot of this project in the fall. So this is going to be kind of like what I call the Global Flourishing Study 2.0. So we're really excited to be launching this work, and we are open to collaborations and pulling in a number of collaborators from around the world as we start to develop what this is going to look like. So I'm going to go a little bit now into what is child flourishing? And so this is coming from our research the last 2 years, working with World Vision and developing a hope and love measure, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But child flourishing, the way we're defining that is when all aspects of a child's being are nurtured and life is experienced in all its fullness. And so when we look at flourishing, it's not really the absence of suffering, but the presence of meaning, dignity, and love that's actively shaping the child's life. It seeks more than survival, cultivating each child's gifts, calling their callings and capacity for goodness. And we see that it takes roots in communities of compassion, belonging, and faith, and matures into a life marked by character, virtue, resilience, compassion, and enduring hope. And this is based on the foundation of the Global Flourishing Study, which is very has several questions that really look at retrospectively at the childhood experiences. So some of the findings we find from the Global Flourishing Study is that, of course, positive parental relationships have a very positive impact. Regular religious service attendance has a positive impact. Then excellent childhood, what we call self-rated health. So this is of the Global Flourishing Study of people looking retrospectively, but if they had good health in childhood, then we see that individuals are flourishing. Sense of belonging, and then absence of adverse childhood experiences. So it really does validate a lot of the other findings that we have around ACEs and childhood well-being across the lifespan. So getting a little deeper, and I could spend, days going through the findings, but when we look at what happens in childhood that predicts flourishing, here's a little bit deeper picture. One of the questions we added to wave one in the very beginning is physically or sexually abused growing up. As you can see, that is the most significant negative predictor of our childhood predictors of long-term flourishing for an individual. Financial support or financial status of family growing up also had a significant impact on individuals flourishing. If they felt like an outsider, relative, or didn't really feel like they had a good sense of belonging, that also was a predictor of long-term poor outcomes. Parental marital status also was a negative predictor. When we looked at positive outcomes, if they have very good or somewhat good relationships with the father, and if we see here, if they attended religious services at least once a week, if they had very good or somewhat good relationships with the mother, and years of birth did have an impact, and then self-rated excellent health growing up. So there's a lot more in-depth data that we can draw from to really help us as we design the child flourishing study. What we're going to be looking at in the childhood flourishing study is really also understanding much deeper the environments and the types of interventions that are impacting children, and how children that have experienced adversity in childhood, if there's ways to bolster their resilience so that they can have better long-term potential for flourishing. So we're going to be sharing this research at a deeper level that we've done with World Vision in collaboration with Harvard and Baylor at a summit in June, this June, 3rd through the 5th. It'll be at Vatican City at the Augustinianum. And we have a hybrid option for people to join. It's no cost to join, and we're so hoping that you will join because we can provide a much deeper experience of both the data, and then we're going to have opportunities for collaboration at this event. So we hope that you can come either in person or virtually to that program. So that's what I have for you today. And now we're going to go a little bit deeper into discussing, I think, with our panelists.
Yes, thank you so much, Jennifer. I think the presentation you just made really shows these efforts at systematization, and indeed 200,000 respondents across 22 countries. This is the most comprehensive studies that we have to present that is looking at flourishing in general. And of course, as Child Rights Agency, we're very happy to see that the Global Flourishing 2.0 is looking in depth at children and faith and their nurturing. And I think the findings you highlighted in terms of meaning, dignity, and love, and the practice of positive relationships, the environments, and how this is all rooted in community. I think the speakers now in the discussion will highlight some of these elements, both at the foundational level of theory and practice within their context and their faiths, but also at the very practical level. I've seen today connecting with us, we have many practitioners and also a few questions coming up on the concrete ways and how child flourishing can be really nurtured, and what are the pathways that we can find. So thank you very much for this introduction. As you said, everything will be shared with the attendees, and everyone is really welcome to join the Global Summit in a hybrid mode that is coming up in a little shorter than a month. The link is also shared in the chat. I think we're moving now into a conversational part of these webinars that we'll see our speakers contributing for 2 rounds of questions. And I think I'll try to proceed with round 1, that is really looking at the foundations for the flourishing and the nurturing of child spiritual development. I'm very pleased to be joined by Professor Anand Rabachan, Professor of Religion at St. Olaf College in Minnesota. Again, his full bio will be shared by my colleagues in the chat. And Professor Rabachan, from an Hindu perspective, how is flourishing understood, particularly in relation to the ethical development, and also, as Jennifer just discussed, the meaning, purpose, and dignity in how the child's spiritual development contributes to it. Yes. Professor Rabachan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleonora, and greetings, everyone. It's a special honor to be with all of you today. The Hindu tradition from ancient times has described human flourishing as having 4 interrelated dimensions, and I'll briefly describe these. The first in Sanskrit is artha, often translated as wealth, but more fully, it refers to the material and social conditions that allow a child to flourish. Food, shelter, safety, education, real opportunities for growth. Children do not flourish under conditions of poverty and deprivation. The second dimension is karma, or opportunities for play. And this is really important. Karma reminds us that children flourish when they have ample opportunities for play, to imagine, to laugh, to experience delight in the world. Children do not flourish when, because of violence, poverty, or child labor, they are denied the joys of play that are essential to their growth. The third dimension is dharma, or the ethical formation of the child. Dharma reminds us that children flourish when they are guided in cultivating and nurturing virtues such as non-injury, ahimsa, reverence for living beings, compassion, honesty, responsibility, and in understanding their place within a larger web of relationships. Children do not flourish when they are left without ethical guidance, or when they grow up in environments where violence, injustice, untruth, and indifference are normalized. The fourth and final dimension is moksha, or the spiritual formation of the child. Moksha reminds us that children flourish not only through material well-being and ethical guidance, as important as these are, but also through a sense of connection to what is deepest and most sacred in life. This spiritual dimension contributes to the flourishing of the child by nurturing the inner life. It helps children develop a sense of meaning and purpose and a capacity for reflection. It fosters resilience in times of difficulty, cultivates inner peace, and deepens their awareness of themselves and their relationships with others. Spiritual nurturing helps to ground virtues in a deeper reality. And without this dimension, a child's development risks remaining incomplete, lacking depth and grounding. So together, these four dimensions offer a holistic vision of the flourishing of the child. So children thrive and flourish when their material and social needs are met, when they are free to experience joy and play and imagination, when they are guided in ethical living, and when their inner spiritual lives are nurtured. Each dimension supports and deepens the others. And when any one of these is neglected, the well-being of the child is diminished. But when they are all honored, we nurture not only capable and responsible children, but whole human beings, grounded, joyful, compassionate, and open to the deepest possibilities of life. Thank you, Eleonora.
Thank you so much, Professor Rambachan. This was really very inspiring. And I think these four dimensions of wealth, ethical formation, play, and the spiritual formation also very much converge with the dimensions that Dr. Wardman was explaining before, really around the environment and around the positive relationships. So there is a beautiful communication between the science and the Hindu tradition that we are exploring today. People are already asking for your remarks, so I say it again, we're going to be sharing with everyone. I think, as we promised, we're going to be moving between praxis and academic studies and between spiritual traditions. And since 2018, Arigato International convenes a large consortium of partners that believe and work on nurturing values and spirituality in the early years. And I would like to give the floor now to Mrs. Maria Lucia Uribe, for telling us a little bit more about how the children's spiritual development and his unfolding is making a distinct but very integrated dimension for holistic development. Over to you, Maria Lucia.
Thank you so much, Leonora, and it is a pleasure for me to be here and to share with the very distinguished panelists. So I'm going to speak from the work of the consortium, and a link is going to be put on the chat to the work that has been done during the last 6 years or 8 years already. So children's spiritual development is understood as the gradual and progressive unfolding of children's innate ability to connect with themselves, with others, with nature, and with what people refer to as God, the divine, the transcendent, or ultimate reality, in the search for meaning, purpose, belonging, and transcendence. And Professor Rampachan spoke about these aspects very articulately. This definition is important because it shifts the conversation. It moves us away from seeing spirituality as something abstract, doctrinal, or limited to religious instruction, and instead situates it as a universal and lived dimension of human development, something that is innate. We are all born with this dimension, and it's present in every child across all contexts. What makes this dimension distinct is that it speaks to the inner life of the child, to questions of meaning, identity, purpose, and belonging. And it is where children begin to make sense of themselves and the world, where they form early ethical reflections and intuitions, and where they experience connection beyond the immediate and the visible. For the consortium, the spiritual development of children is central to holistic development and is deeply interconnected with other dimensions of growth: Evidence from psychology, education, and public health increasingly shows that this inner dimension can contribute meaningfully to children's overall well-being and flourishing. For instance, it shapes how children relate to others through empathy, compassion, and ethical awareness, which are consistently linked to stronger prosocial behavior and positive relationships. It also influences emotional development through a sense of inner grounding, hope, and resilience, supporting children's ability to cope with stress and adversity. It supports cognitive development through curiosity, reflection, and meaning making, which are associated with deeper engagement, identity formation, and reflective thinking. But it also contributes to overall well-being by fostering a sense of purpose and connectedness, which has been linked to better mental health and healthier life patterns. So this integrated perspective highlights that the spiritual dimension is not an additional component, but a foundational element that strengthens and connects all areas of child's development. So children's spirituality needs to be intentionally nurtured to flourish. It doesn't develop in isolation. For the consortium, it requires three essential and interrelated conditions, which I think has been mentioned by Professor Rambachan as well: a safe and respectful and violence-free environment, positive relationship with parents, caregivers, and also the closest to them may be educators, an empowering experience that allow children to explore, play, and express their inner lives. Within these conditions, spiritual development is fundamentally relational and experiential. It doesn't grow through instruction or imposition, but through everyday interactions, relationships of trust, moments of care, experiences of meaning and wonder, and opportunities for reflection and dialogue. In this process, children's innate spiritual capacities such as empathy, compassion, self-awareness, curiosity, and sense of meaning and connection are gradually expressed and strengthened. So this is why the role of parents, caregivers, educators, and communities is central. We are not only transmitting knowledge, we should be shaping the environment and the relationship through which children's inner capacities can emerge and develop. And when these conditions are present, that what we observe is not only development, but a way of being. Children begin to relate to themselves, to others, and to the world with greater awareness, care, and purpose. And this is what ultimately grounds their ability to flourish, to navigate complexity and adversity with a sense of meaning. So the invitation is simple but profound: to recognize that every child already carries these capacities, and that our responsibility is to nurture them intentionally through relationships, environments, and everyday practices that affirm dignity, connection, and purpose. I will leave it there, Eleonora.
Yes, thank you very much, Maria Lucia. I think it was very good indeed to highlight that spirituality is not abstract, it is innate, but we have to be intentional in the ways we nurture it and in the environment we create. And to this purpose, I'm very pleased to have with us Dr. Tobin Hart, the co-founder of the Child Spirit Institute, connecting from the West Virginia University as well. Dr. Hart, you have written a lot about the children's spirituality. How are these perception, intuition, and meaning making that are innate, but how are they contributing to the child's sense of flourishing? And also, how can adults better recognize and support them indeed in intentional way, as Maria Lucia just described to us? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleonora. Nice to be with you all today, this morning, outside of Atlanta, where I am. So my interest, I'm a psychology professor outside of Atlanta as well, and my interest has been primarily in the innate capacities of children as it relates to spirituality. And so, you know, if I had to sort of bottom line this, it's about children's ways of knowing, and that knowing is delicate, it's participative, it's embodied, it's less mediated, it's more direct, it's intimate in a way. So when a child has a moment of wonder, for example, I just had a thunderclap here outside of Atlanta a little while ago. And when a child, you can think about thunder or lightning, and it's as a concept, but when you experience it, it becomes in and of itself awe and wonder. And this experience of being is part of what really sets children's spiritual ways of knowing apart, I think. in many ways, as we age, we separate knowing from being. That is, knowing becomes a commodity. We live in the information age or the post-information age. And so this sense of a child's knowing is so direct and immediate. And so wonder is one way in which is readily available for children and does contribute to this sense of flourishing. When one has a sense of wonder or awe, the world becomes enchanted, embodied, and in a way that's very immediate and direct. When we think about, for example, in adult traditions about how to nourish one's spiritual life, we hear things like beginner's mind from Zen, or from the book of Matthew, turn and become like a little child, only then shall ye enter the kingdom. These ideas are hints about this way of knowing. It's not childish, but it's childlike. What's that? It's this radical openness. This, what William James, for example, called a radical empiricism. Everything is wide open to us. And in many ways, it's more about resonance than it is about reason. It's a balancing those things. As we age a little bit, we know the world a little more through our reason. And it is this, but once we lose that resonance, that direct connection, our natural compassion and empathy, for example, our sense of wondering, what am I here for? What's this about? Our use of imagination that really feeds possibility and blends what we know with what we don't know. That's what imagination does, really catalyzes us that. So again, this is not so much about a worldview. This is about a world presence, I would say. And that presence is one that is intimate. Children and the world meet in a way that's not a distant subject and object. It's a way in which they're entirely embedded. And that is a clue, I think, to not only providing this sort of basic nourishment, but also as a reminder as we grow of how do we keep that sort of resonance alive in us. So that's maybe a place to stop.
Thank you very much, Professor Hart, and thank you again for also reminding us on the importance of presence and imagination. I think also for us adults to relearn how to resonate and reason at the same time without too much going on the cognitive. I think this was a very beautiful journey around what innate spirituality means and how it manifests in children and in their sense of wonder. Thank you so much. Again, moving now more also into the research and praxis, we have Dr. Catherine Kraft from World Vision International and the University of East London. And we have heard before from the World Vision studies. So the question for you is how to construct such hope, love, and relational well-being, which are indeed central towards vision work, help us better understand and measure the flourishing and the spiritual dimension. Because I think a lot in the practice is about the measurements and the impacts and how these dimensions manifest. So what can you tell and share with us today? Over to you, Dr. Kraft.
Thanks so much for this opportunity. And before I answer the question, I just have to say I'm so honored not just to be on this panel, but to be with such an amazing group of participants. I've just been blown away as everybody's introducing themselves. So thank you so much for the opportunity to join you. Eleonora, your question is could not be more perfect for World Vision's approach. We have been on a journey for several years now to try to figure out how to report on our top aspirational statement as a Christian NGO, which is that children experience the love of God. We are a Christian NGO, but we are not a proselytizing NGO that seeks to convert children to Christianity, and we work with children of all different faiths, and yet we still do believe that all children can and should experience the love of God. So we've been on a journey to try to figure out how can we measure that, because if we measure it and we report on it, then we are more proactive in programming to it. And so we actually engaged a group of theologians, and I'll come back to some of what they shared. But then But then we also went out and we interviewed children across 8 countries, 658 children to be specific, across 8 countries to get their perspective. And kind of jumping to the end from the love to the relationality, by far and away, the most universal theme that emerged from what children shared with us was the significance of human connectivity in supporting their nurturing of their experience of love and their ability to hope. And that's where the third word you brought up came in. Over and over again, we heard that hope is important. Hope is a virtue that allows people to flourish. So I'm going to share briefly. I promise I won't take a long time. I'm going to share very briefly one slide, which captures our framework. This is something that the theologians that I mentioned helped us develop. So, because we are a Christian NGO, we did kind of put God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is the Christian definition of God, in the overall space. However, our framework starts with the statement that God is love. And so love is the transformative power we're talking about here. And we don't need to worry about definitions of God or any of that. But the important thing is that true, genuine love, which is usually experienced by children through human relationships, is transformative. And that transformation is a transformation towards flourishing. And so we have this wider theme of flourishing. And there are many ways in which flourishing could be captured, but the word hope came up over and over again, both from a Christian perspective and from the perspective of an NGO that works in some of the world's most vulnerable communities around and with the most vulnerable children. We work in war zones, fragile contexts, in the poorest places of the world. And the word hope really resonates with that concept of what flourishing looks like. But so that second box there really is about that transformation, and we've used the word hope to capture that sense of transformation. However, we really struggled to define the word hope. What does hope mean? We ended up not landing on a definition. It's an inner virtue, it's an inner strength, it's an inner capacity that is very, very difficult to put into words. And because it's very difficult to put into words, we would not be able to measure it. What is hope? What are we looking for? What are we trying to measure? However, what both the children said in the interviews we did with them and what the theologians helped explain from the religious perspective is that hope, a flourishing hope, is manifested externally. And so that's how we came up with the 6 signs of hope, which Jennifer alluded to earlier. And so we call this the Signs of Hope framework. And the 6 signs of hope are expressions of character of children rooted in love, loving relationships, compassion, resilience, purpose, joy, wisdom, and personal faith or spiritual life. Those things, it's interesting. I see we have a few World Vision colleagues on the call today, and it's been a very interesting conversation within World Vision because in some ways we can teach children to be compassionate, resilient, etc. But in other ways, we can't. It is the power of the love, which leads to the hope, which motivates them to express these outward signs. So yeah, we can talk about programming and nurturing compassion, resilience, purpose, joy, wisdom, and spiritual life. But this framework is really focused on the relationality. How do we love children and model these things? Because that seems to be where the most powerful transformation happens. Just briefly before I stop sharing, the final box is the active participation, because sometimes we think of children as recipients of spiritual nurture and spirituality, but actually, as children grow in hope and demonstrate these external signs, they become the fuel of love within their communities. And so they are able to nurture this in other people. So what we measure is the 6 signs, and the rest of it is explaining why we measure the 6 signs.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Catherine. And I see across traditions, there are definitely certain elements that come back as this sense of joy, the relationship part, and also the hope, and definitely seeing hope as a virtue and how it's this that allows also the people to flourish. And I think also Dr. Hart had reminded us about the participatory and participative element of the nourishing of the spirituality. And I see how this is coming back also in your study as one key element for children to really embrace and grow into the flourishing. Thank you so much. We're gonna be moving to our next speaker, Dr. Abdallah Rothman, that is connecting with us today from the United Arab Emirates. And it is a professor of Islamic psychology. So we want for him now to share with us from the perspective of Islamic psychology, how is the spiritual nature of the child understood, and how this relates with the human flourishing and the ethical virtues that we have been exploring today. Professor Abdallah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here with all of you, and it's really an honor. I think my remarks probably will resonate a lot with mirror sort of what Professor Ramachan and Dr. Hart were saying, because these traditions we meet in the defining the human being as a spiritual being. And so I think what I would say is that a child does not necessarily need to be taught how to seek meaning, that they're born already oriented toward it. So from an Islamic psychological perspective, the child is not really understood as a blank slate or morally neutral in a purely developmental sense, but that the child is born upon, in Arabic, the word is fitra, which means the innate primordial disposition, that's God-given orientation towards truth, goodness, and ultimately towards the divine. And so this innate nature, this fitra, includes the child's capacity for connection to self, connection to others, connection to the natural world, and to God. And so spiritual development is not something that we impose, it's something that we protect and we nurture, and we create the conditions to allow it to unfold. And at the center of this is what we refer to in the Islamic tradition as the qalb, which is the heart. And we're not simply meaning a metaphorical heart, but the center of perception and moral awareness that lives within the physical body, but connects them to their spiritual nature and their metaphysical nature. So even from a young age, the child has a subtle capacity within to recognize what is true, what is good, what is right, even though this capacity is deeply shaped by relationships and environment, and unfortunately covered over gradually as they engage with the world and forget that nature and are not reflected that. And so human flourishing within this framework is not only about well-being or developmental success, it's about alignment with this original nature. And flourishing occurs when the different dimensions of the human being, the body, the mind, the nafs, or what you could say ego self, and the spirit are in harmony under the guidance of a sound and receptive heart. And so ethical development is then not primarily about rule following or behavior management. It's about preserving and cultivating the child's inner moral compass. And so a child who remains connected to this fitra, this innate disposition, doesn't simply follow rules. They actually begin to perceive with their heart. The heart has this ability to perceive things as they are with sincerity. And so this shifts how we think about education and care. The goal is not just about teaching values, but creating the conditions in which those values can be lived and experienced from within. And this happens through relationships, through caregivers, environments that particularly embody mercy and presence, like Dr. Hart was saying. And finally, I would say that, if we look at the tradition, the Islamic tradition, particularly the prophetic tradition, emphasizes gentleness with children. And this isn't simply as a social virtue, but because harshness can veil the heart, the heart's metaphysical or spiritual perception, while mercy allows it to remain open and receptive. And so when this inner orientation is nurtured, it does more than just support individual flourishing. It becomes a protective force. It strengthens empathy, it fosters compassion, and it shapes how children relate to others. And when the community takes this, the word in Arabic is amana, like a sacred trust, seriously, it shapes ways of being that reduce harm and support nonviolence. So in Islamic psychology, the question is not only how we build the child's moral and spiritual life, but how we protect what's already there so it can guide them towards a life of meaning, connection, and compassion.
Thank you, Professor Abdallah. And I think it's so true what you just explained. We cannot teach value, but we really have to create the conditions for experiencing those values. And I think what all of you have been sharing today about the experience of those nurturing environments, about the positive relationships, the connection with the heart are indeed very, very much in line with the across the different traditions that we are exploring today. And it really resonates with me how you said harshness veils the heart. I think, again, this is something that across traditions we can really say how this also breaks the trust between human beings, so breaks those innate connections. Thank you so much for this sharing. I think now moving into round 2, we want to know a little bit more of the how this takes place. And we do have already some lineup questions in the chat in terms of the how. So how is the flourishing taking places, also in different contexts and in contexts of adversity. So Dr. Robin, I turn back to you from your perspective. What are the essential relational and environmental conditions that allow children's spiritual life to flourish? And also, of course, then to help us build those conditions, where do you see the greatest gaps today? Over to you.
Yes, thank you. Abdallah, thanks. That was great. It was nice to hear. It's nice to hear from everybody. I'm meeting new friends today, so I really appreciate this. So I'm really interested in what I call psycho-spiritual growth. Psychological and spiritual are strange, sort of paradoxical bedfellows. You know, we're psychological, we want self, and spiritual, we want selflessness. You know, this kind of thing. So it's tricky, but these things are really bound together, I think, in a lot of ways. And so beyond issues of safety and nonviolence and care and gentleness and food and shelter, I've got 6 quick things, I think. And the first one, and for me, the primary one, is feeling felt. So to have an adult or a dog, sometimes kids talk about this, but to really be respected, listened to, have a sense of belonging, you know, this notion of sound early attachment from developmental psychology is so important for everything that follows. But that sense of feeling felt through empathy and compassion is primary, whomever that's from, a teacher, a loved one, a neighbor, it doesn't matter. 2, and this sort of is of a different order maybe, but similar, congruent adult communication. So a lot of times we don't tell children the truth. And so to be able to tell the truth in a way that one can hear it is, I think, a spiritual friend. So to be able to speak congruently, not to dismiss what a child is maybe intuitively feeling with words to try to calm them down, I don't think that's helpful. I think that causes a kind of internal dysregulation of knowing in some ways. 3, you know, great role models, always virtual, literary, you know, in the same room. 4, some means for expression or voice, always, whether it's someone who's traumatized or someone who's just finding their way, you know, from art, it could be from anything, but some way to have their metaphorical or their literal voice. 5, beauty. I'll just leave that as it is, somehow to be able to expose to beauty. And the last one is silence. And the greatest gap I think we have these days, at least in the worlds that I work in usually, is the effect of screen time. And as we ramp up through AI, this is going to be the greatest possibility for civilization and also the greatest threat to human consciousness in some way. And so And so to find internal technology that matches that external technology can really help sort of instantiate space where the spiritual life can really bloom and flourish in some ways. And so silence is one of those things that's hard to come by, particularly given the feed that we have, a feed that's not so nourishing often. So often silence in one way or another, however we might do that. Might be just a pause in a classroom. It might be a moment of prayer. It might be anything, in nature and so forth. So there are a few things. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Hart. I think these 6 elements can really be a compass, a very practical compass for all those joining us today, for really nurturing the spiritual nurture of the child and, of course, of ourselves as well. Maria Lucia, I would like to get back to you now so that you can tell us a little bit more about the implementation of the toolkit on the spiritual development of children in the early years and what shifts have been observed by the facilitators implementing the program.
Thank you. I think part of what we are seeing is very much in relation to what the other panelists had been sharing, and in particular, Dr. Rothman, when you spoke about, that it's not imposed and how you allow this growing in a way through the environments and the relationships. This is very much what we have been seeing. So we have observed through the implementation in Brazil, India, Mexico, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Tanzania, that the change happens most powerfully at the level of relationships, mindsets, and everyday practices by the parents and caregivers. And this is consistently reflected in the monitoring and evaluation process that we conducted. One of the most consistent shifts is a move from reactive to more reflective caregiving or parenting. When caregivers are given intentional spaces for dialogue and reflection, they begin to examine their own beliefs, values, and experiences, particularly around discipline and authority. And this has led to increased self-awareness and emotional regulation. In Tanzania, for example, the use of calming strategies increased significantly from around half of the participants at baseline to 18 to 90% after participation. And similarly, in Brazil, caregivers describe consciously pausing and replacing punitive reactions with calm conversations with their children. A second important shift is the reconnection with core values already present within cultural, religious, and spiritual traditions, such as compassion, respect, and nonviolence. What is significant is that change is not imposed. In Pakistan, for instance, facilitators were able to draw on Islamic teachings to promote child dignity and nonviolence, supporting caregivers to question harmful norms and affirming those norms that promote love and respect for the child. And in India, educators integrated mindfulness, connection with nature, and moments of reflection into daily routines, drawing on values of inner awareness, harmony, respect for life, and interconnectedness. At the same time, the findings show that this process is not automatic. Across the context, facilitators often face challenges in explicitly linking religious and spiritual teachings to child dignity and nonviolent caregiving, and require much more concrete examples and support to guide these reflections. Where these connections were successfully made, they have contributed to tangible behavioral change, including reductions in verbal punishment and increased recognition of harmful practices. We also see a strengthening of child-adult relationships, caregivers reporting spending more time with their children. In Mexico, for example, caregivers highlighted dialogue as a key parenting practice, while across all the contexts, caregivers reported better communication with their children, more availability, and being emotionally available for the children. Across contexts, we also see a shift in how spirituality itself is understood. Participants move beyond viewing it only as a religious practice to recognize it as lived values. This broader understanding translates into concrete changes in how children are engaged, and I think that's very critical. Caregivers started to listen more intentionally. They created more spaces for children to express their thoughts and feelings, and they involved them more in everyday decisions and interaction. At the same time, the implementation has surfaced a critical dimension, the mental health and psychosocial well-being of caregivers themselves. Participants across contexts share experiences of stress, violence in early childhood, and unresolved trauma, and how this affects their parenting practices. And this highlights that caregiving is shaped by lived experiences, and that without support, patterns of adversity can be transmitted across generations. And this is why the findings point clearly to the need to integrate mental health and psychosocial support, including faith-sensitive approaches as part of this work. Finally, what the evidence shows is that nurturing children's spiritual development doesn't happen through isolated activities, but through everyday interactions. How caregivers listen, respond, and spend time with children, how we play with our children, how we relate to them. And the evidence suggests that lasting change comes not only from shifting attitudes, but from supporting caregivers' inner development and how they live these values daily with their children. And as environment becomes more reflective, compassionate, and grounded in dignity, we begin to see the conditions in which children can truly flourish in their relationships, in their sense of meaning and connection. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think many of these findings are really resonated with the 6 tips that we have just received in terms of giving children voice, in terms of the silence, also as a method maybe for this shift between reaction and reflection, but also in terms of really finding opportunities where children feel felt and they build this connection with adult on daily interactions. So thank you so much. Dr. Abdallah, we have heard now also from Maria Lucia that in some contexts of prolonged adversity, parents and caretakers are exposed also to trauma, and there is a need also for their psychosocial support. So in this context of trauma and prolonged adversity, how do you understand then the relationship between psychological distress and spiritual disconnection? And what can faith-sensitive approaches really do to support healing and restoring a sense of meaning?
Okay, thank you. I think one thing we have to focus on is that when a child experiences trauma, what is disrupted is not their spirit, but their ability to feel connected to it. So in Islamic paradigm of the human being and how we understand Islamic psychology, we understand trauma not only as psychological disruption, but as something that can actually affect the child's relationship to yes, meaning and to the self and to others, but ultimately to the divine, this innate connection. And so trauma can basically fragment the inner experience, and it can disrupt the body's sense of safety and stability, which then distorts perception and leads to these protective patterns in how the child relates to the world. But it can also affect something deeper. It can impact the child's sense of being held in love and their capacity for hope and their orientation towards meaning. At the same time, I think it's important to be precise that from an Islamic perspective, the ruh is what is meant. The word ruh is the spirit that remains intact. It remains pure. It remains connected to its original nature of seeing that God is love, and that the nafs is the self that can get caught in forgetfulness. And so the fitra that I mentioned before, this innate disposition, is the child's innate orientation towards that truth and goodness, and that doesn't get destroyed when they experience trauma. It's just covered over, it's clinched, occluded. And so what may appear as spiritual disconnection is often not a loss of spirituality, but a disruption in the child's experience of connection, on a fundamental experiential way. And so especially when their inner world has become overwhelming or unsafe. So this means that psychological distress and spiritual struggle are often not separate. They're intertwined, but in a nuanced way. Sometimes distress obscures access to meaning and connection, and sometimes a loss of meaning deepens distress. And sometimes what looks like disconnection is actually a protective withdrawal. And so there's wisdom in it, but it's about the conditions with which to unfold that. And so this is where I think faith-sensitive approaches to mental health and psychosocial support can play a critical role, but only if they're approached with depth and care. It's not about the sort of protocols or the religious theological aspect. It's about the embodiment. And so really faith-sensitive approach is not simply about introducing religious language or encouraging behavioral practices. It should be, in my opinion, it's about recognizing the full reality of the human being, psychological, relational, embodied, and spiritual, while meeting the child where they are. In my own work, in this method that I've developed called the Shifa method, for example, we begin with restoring presence and helping the child come into a sense of safety through self-regulation within their body and within relationship. And so presence in connection not only to people but into nature is key. Like being present in nature helps kids find their nature. So I have this saying, we find our nature in nature. And so this connection to nature, I think we need to consider this as spiritual. And so what's important is that meaning is not imposed, that faith isn't forced, but instead these are allowed to reappear naturally in reflection as the child begins to feel safe and seen, and sort of order that support restores that natural disposition. And then they innately experience the safety that exists in experiencing the love of God. But especially with children, healing happens through relationship first, through attuned presence, consistent care, and the environment that restores this natural trust and belonging. And so that's how children experience and trust the love of God, is through loving caregivers. So I think the role of faith-sensitive support is not bypassing the pain, but restoring wholeness by helping the child reconnect to themselves in a deeper experiential way, sort of within the community, within the village. And so this is not, it shouldn't be about just outcomes, but creating conditions and creating the spaces of safety so that the presence where the child's innate capacities can emerge, reemerge.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Abdallah, for both kind of really making us understand a little bit more about trauma, about the disruptions it creates, but also how important it is to restore presence and to connect with the children without impositions, indeed. Professor Rambachan, I have another question for you. Again, looking at the spiritual traditions and their own teaching, how can spiritual traditions draw from their own teachings to both nurture children's dignity and challenge practices that undermine nonviolence and well-being?
Thank you so much, Eleonora. I guess I want to begin my first point by emphasizing that in the tradition from which I come, the Hindu tradition, children possess the same dignity and worth as adults. Dignity is not dependent on biological age or on emotional and intellectual maturity. Dignity is derived from the equal presence of the sacred reality in every being. And so the implication of this is that the significance or the dignity of the child is intrinsic. It is not instrumental. Children are valuable not because they serve adult needs or they fulfill adult purposes. My second point is that we speak of the spiritual dignity of the child, but this must not remain an abstract theological ideal. It must now find expression in the practical commitment of our religious traditions, our communities, our states, to support policies and practices that contribute to the physical and social well-being of children to the exercise of their imagination in play and to their ethical and spiritual formation. Just as important, our commitment to the dignity of children requires us to identify, to challenge, to transform harmful practices that impede their flourishing. So to just give an example of how I see this working within my own tradition, the Hindu tradition regards non-hurting or non-injury, ahimsa, as the cardinal ethical virtue that expresses our reverence for the sacred of every being. And Mahatma Gandhi, in his own time, extended the meaning of ahimsa or non-injury from the personal to the social political spheres. This was his great contribution. So I think that in our time, we are called upon to draw from this ethic of non-injury, to examine all the teachings and practices in our homes, in our religious communities, that harm children or impede their flourishing. And we need, in particular, if I would say so, to be attentive to harmful practices that are legitimized by appeals to religious authority. These include child marriage or preference for the male child. Any practice that diminishes the dignity, the freedom, the well-being of the child stands in tension with this foundational vision. The appeal to tradition or to scripture cannot by itself justify practices that cause harm. And I really want to emphasize this point. Spiritual traditions must continually return to their deepest ethical and theological foundations and allow these to guide the interpretation of inherited customs. So in the Hindu tradition, the ethic of non-injury calls us not only to refrain from physical harm, but also to resist all forms of injury, social, emotional, structural, that impede the flourishing of children. A non-injury or ahimsa must serve as a guiding ethical lens for interpreting our sacred texts. So when there are diverse or conflicting teachings, those teachings that uphold non-injury, compassion, the well-being of all must be understood as expressing the deepest intention of the tradition. And this requires both honesty and courage. It asks religious communities to acknowledge that not all inherited practices and interpretations have been or are life-affirming for children, and to take responsibility for reforming and transforming these when necessary. So in this way, I think that fidelity to tradition does not mean uncritical preservation, but a deeper alignment with its highest values. And these are the values that affirm the sacredness of every child and call us to nurture their full humanity.
Thank you, Professor Rambachan, for this call to exactly, and not really staying with uncritical preservation, but re-examining the non-injuring practice. And this is also something we can do ourselves as individuals and really looking at what we're doing and the daily practices and understanding what is harming children. So again, this is also very practical understanding of what ahimsa means in everyday practice for nurturing spirituality in children. Dr. Kraft, I have one question more for you also in terms of what evidence do we have that strengthening inner and relational capacity contributes to resilience and well-being, particularly in fragile context. Now, I must say this was a question we had agreed before, but many people actually in the chat are asking this exact question. For children living in conflict situations from DRC to Ukraine, to other settings, how can spirituality and inner development being nurtured, and how can this contribute also to their sense of hope? So this is both a question we had before, but also a live question many participants have. Over to you.
You definitely saved the most difficult question for last. It's an extremely challenging question. And for World Vision, as a global NGO working with millions of children, many of whom are among the most vulnerable children across close to 100 countries, we actually want a very solid answer to this question. We want to be able to show quantitative, conclusive, numerical, counterfactual proof of concepts which are actually much more innate and personally experienced. And I think that's something that we've heard from each speaker today in different ways is there's something much more subtle going, I don't know if subtle is the right word, but at the heart level going on that is quite difficult to just say, okay, well, we researched it, we studied it, and we proved it's happening. However, if we broaden our understanding of evidence, we definitely have qualitative data, many stories, many explorations, case studies, etc., and some really great theory. And for us as a Christian NGO, we draw also from Christian theology. So I'm just going to mention some of what we have learned from our theological reflection. Like I mentioned before, one of the top things that the theologians told us is that God is love. And they expanded on that a bit, saying that we can understand, and this was very important when the conversation of fragility and vulnerability and suffering came up, that all children have actually experienced love because they have the gift of life. Now, they might not recognize it, they might not feel it, they might not see it, but if we shift our mindset a little bit from okay, we have to pull children out of suffering in order for them to have a spiritual, meaningful reality, and instead say that's already there. It's already in their heart. It's already in their soul. They already have the gift of life. And also in the Bible, it says we're all created in the image of God. So that's also an expression of God's love. And this is something to nurture. Then that links also again to something that's in the Bible that we're commanded to love one another. And so all of this points to a strong relational framework as the foundation to child well-being and flourishing. So we know theologically and theoretically that when children are loved, that will contribute to their spiritual well-being, probably disproportionately in the most fragile contexts. And I think that was an important mindset shift for us, that it's not just, okay, well, at least children can have a little bit of hope and love, even if they're suffering, but actually that's when it matters the most. The power of love in the darkest circumstances is massive. The theologians also emphasize that the Bible describes hope as the capacity which allows children to continue to grow and flourish in the darkest of times. In terms of, I also mentioned that we can draw from qualitative data and stories, and we've really been inspired by the depth of insight from the children that we've interviewed. I think, again, sometimes we underestimate the wisdom of children, and it's been great to hear the other speakers mention this. So I'm just going to close off my brief response with actually a quote from a child from Sri Lanka. This child said, "I have felt more trust in my friends and relatives. One day, when I had no one to solve a problem at school, it was my friends who helped me and boosted my confidence. My parents and friends have told me that I'm a confident person. And because of that, I don't harm others and I don't say anything that hurts anyone's feelings."
Thank you.
Take that as evidence if you want.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. I think this is a beautiful testimony. And also, yes, indeed, please share these studies and the quotes from children that around the 700 children that World Vision has consulted on these topics from the diverse setting, because indeed there is a lot of wisdom there. We have gotten to our question and answer segment, and I have tried to cluster a little bit the many questions you've been getting. I think, Professor Jennifer, I have kind of two questions for you to start with. One is, what was the most surprising finding from the Flourishing study? And the second question is also if people can contribute with their research and insights to the 2.0 version of this study. So that question for you, Jennifer. Sorry, many are asking also about the direct effect of attending weekly religious services. What is the direct effect? Is it about sense of community, transcendence, contemplation? So something more about that particular indicator you mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll speak to the last question first. The reason we're launching the Initiative on Faith and Flourishing is to exactly to dive in deeply into that question, because we really want to understand what practices are doing, and we do have questions related to other senses of community and belonging. So. It could be because it provides better community and belonging. It could be because it provides structure. It could be because it provides context for adversity. So we're going to be diving much more deeply in our 2.0 version. So that's one of the reasons why we're launching this study. Really understand at a deep level what is impacting the child's sense of resilience, especially within the context of their different faith traditions. I don't know that I was actually really surprised by the findings that when we look at the childhood predictors of the study, because I've been delving deeply into the ACEs and trauma literature for the last 4 years. And so I think for me that it's pretty consistent with some of the smaller studies that are there in terms of the impact of adversity on childhood. And so I wasn't really surprised by that. I think one of the most alarming findings was around the facts that youth are not flourishing basically around the world. And that is alarming in the sense of, are we seeing a degradation in overall conditions, for youth? And so that's something that we really actually have to pay quite a bit of attention to. I forget the third question you had for me. So those were two answers.
Can people contribute to the study or getting to their experience?
Yes. So the purpose for the summit in June is to start to gather momentum around the collaboration. We are talking to a number of very large organizations, which we're very excited to have participate. And of course, World Vision is going to be, it's a foundational partner. But we have opportunities for others. So they can reach out to me. I think you have my email. You can put it in there. And happy to engage. But we encourage you to attend the summit if possible, so that you can, get a deeper understanding and what it would take and where the opportunities might be.
Thank you, Dr. Jennifer. We have shared the link to the summit, and again, it will be hybrid, and we are inviting everyone to join and contribute. Dr. Abdallah, I have a very direct question to you. What are the indicators that I have done a decent job on nurturing my children's spirituality?
I think indicators would be that they're able to understand themselves primarily as a spiritual being. I love the saying, the quote from the French philosopher that we're not human beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And so I think if a child can have a sense that they have this transcendent relational part of themselves that is innate, and that has a lot to do with their ability to connect with the center of their being in their heart. So if they can, and that comes in a child's ability to self-regulate when they sense that something's unsafe or sense that externally, rather than only just trusting on unreliable people sometimes, or environments, that they can check in with themselves. In the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Astafti qalbik," which means consult your heart. So if the child has the ability to kind of check in with themselves and check where am I centered and where is the center of myself, then I think this would be a fantastic sign of nurturing their spiritual development.
Thank you, Dr. Abdallah. Would the other speakers also would like to contribute to this? So what are the signs, or what are the tips that you would give to parents on how to recognize they are helping the spiritual nurture of the children?
Eleonora, maybe.
Yes, please.
Oh, Dr. Hart, you wanted to come in? No? I go ahead.
I can, but it's fine. I think Abdullah said it beautifully. I mean, I think the heart, we know whether when someone looks at us in a difficult way, or we get a word that seems harsh, the heart, our chest literally feels like it contracts. And when somebody feels loved in a way, it expands. And I think, that's as direct an experience. It's a lived experience of being. And, for children to be able to recognize and regulate that sense of being, particularly through the eye of the heart, is the maybe simplest and clearest way to express that. I like that very much.
Thank you, Dr. Art. Maria Lucia, and then maybe Professor Ambachan. I see you unmute. Yes.
Yes, I mean, I think it's I mean, as a parent also, I think it's when we see actually how children live that interconnectedness with others in daily life, how they care for others. If our child is empathic when someone is suffering and they offer a hand to the other, when they listen, when they try to do something to help others, I think these are the signs that we have helped nurture their spirituality. In the toolkit that the consortium developed, we have a booklet on activities. And we believe that daily interactions are critical to nurture this spirituality. Cooking together with the children, storytelling, helping others. Small and simple things that children see on how we do it, and then they also do it. This is the power also of role modeling. I think Dr. Hart also mentioned that. So I think how we react to problems, how we react to issues of violence as well, children learn all this from us. So you will see it in them when they resolve conflicts peacefully, when they listen to others, when they become more compassionate towards friends and around them, but also towards you as a parent. So I think those are, for me, the signs that are reflected in those day-to-day interactions.
Thank you. Professor Rambachan, before I give you the word, there is also another related question that has come, and is about if nurturing the spirituality is linked to the love of God, but can we have emotional development and spiritual development without linking to the love of God? So that's also one question, if you can include it in your answer.
Yes, and thank you, Eleonora. What I have to add is, just complimentary to what all of my colleagues have already said. But I think I would put the emphasis on looking, as Maria Lucia mentioned, to looking at the kinds of relationships my child are forming with others in his or her community, in the school and the playground, etc. And for me, I will discern the growth in the spirituality of my child if I see my child increasing in reverence for life, for all living beings, a sense of the sanctity of life, which would include how he or she cares for life in all of its expressions, life in the animals and life in the natural world. Secondly, as I think I would look also to see if my child is growing in compassion, and compassion in the sense that is my child moved when another child is unhappy? Does my child laugh when another child is happy? Is he or she growing in his ability to empathize with others in joy and in suffering? And the third point I want to add, especially in today's context, is my child developing an inclusive sense of community that includes people who are different? Does my child value those who look different from him or her, those who speak differently, those who worship differently? Is my child growing in a deeper appreciation of human diversity and learns to delight in that and to celebrate that diversity? It is true, Eleonora, that when we speak of the love of God, we are using theological language that might have greater meaning in some traditions and not in other traditions. Some traditions are non-theistic traditions and speak very little the God language or the theocentric language. But I think that's why I think, that in talking about the nurturing and growing in spirituality, we look to the ways in which our spiritualities are expressed in relationships. Because all of these spiritual values, ultimately, even though they may be rooted profoundly within our own hearts, they ultimately become meaningful as they find expression in relationships. And I think we could also look at those traditions that are non-theistic, but which also commend, values that we will all want to affirm together as reflecting the deepest truths of our traditions. Thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reflecting on these elements. And we are just about to come to conclusion. So I would like to ask you, and I mean, you have done it replying to the questions, but if you could provide one final concrete and practical recommendation for parents and caregivers, 30 seconds, what would that be? And I'm going to start with Jennifer.
I'm sorry, the 30 seconds to do, I didn't hear the whole thing.
A concrete and practical recommendation for parents and caregivers. I mean, what should they prioritize or invest if they want to nurture their child spiritual development?
Well, I'm actually gonna answer a different question and step back a little bit. That I think we need to be looking at caregiving approaches or support for traumatized children, children who've been trafficked, children who've been orphaned, children who are experiencing displacement because of natural disasters. I think that's where we, as a society, need to emphasize most our work around a spiritual nurture of children, because those are the individuals that we see in the Global Flourishing study that are having the most severe impacts across the lifespan. So I think it's important, and I'll let everybody else answer in terms of for the what I would call the ordinary family or the ideal family, but a significant number of children around the world don't have that. And so I want us to focus on that. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Dr. Jennifer. Dr. Abdallah.
Okay, I'll try to do this quick. I think what's needed first is to shift how we understand spiritual development, not as a separate domain, but as something woven into the everyday experiences of children, how they are seen, treated. Second, I would say we need to equip caregivers and educators not just with knowledge, but with presence. Children's spiritual lives are shaped primarily by what adults, not by what they teach, but who they are, their capacity for attentiveness and compassion. And then finally, I would say we need to create environments that are safe, nonviolent, and relationally grounded with those people that can be in their own hearts. Yes.
Thank you very, very much for this. Dr. Hart.
I'll come back to silence so that people can hear their own voices and enter that field of being. Second one might be an invitation, which my favorite sentence stem is I wonder. So if somebody is across the hall or the room, as an adult, we might say, I wonder what they're feeling right now, or I wonder what we're here for. And it's a very simple way to engage students and invite them into the big questions, and also the development of empathy. The last thing I would say is, to do our own work. As Abdullah just said, we teach mostly who we are. And so to give caregivers and ourselves, that place where we're not sacrificial, but, I love the line, to find that place where our deep gladness meets the world's great need is what we need to find. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Dr. Catherine, 30 seconds.
So I actually asked this question to one of the theologians in our group in an interview I was doing with him last week. And so I can just pass his answer on because I thought it was great. And he said, work on yourself, work on your own relationship with God, work on your own feeling of love, spiritual well-being, spend time praying, spend time making sure that you are in a good place, because if you want to love, the best way to love children is to have love overflowing from your own heart. And so in a lot of ways, focusing on what we do for children might be less important than making sure that we ourselves are vessels of love and full of it ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria Lucia.
Yes, I think on that, our daily interactions to be intentional in listening, intentional in practicing silence, in spending time with our children, and I think being emotionally available. Very often we are with them, but emotionally we are disconnected because we are, with so many preoccupations. But I also want to give maybe a recommendation for policymakers and organizations, UN agencies and others. Normally, the child's spiritual dimension is misunderstood, underinvested, and it's something that is very often related to its religion. We are not integrating it. And I think we need to see the spiritual development of children as an integral part of the holistic development of the child, as an important aspect of human flourishing, and an aspect that needs investment, needs research, needs more understanding, and needs to be integrated in the development of the child as a critical aspect of their well-being. So I would say that is for me the critical aspect in the daily day, but also for those policymakers and those that are developing programs at the global level as well.
Thank you, and thank you for this important reminder. Professor Anand, the last 30 seconds for you.
Thank you, Eleanor. First of all, I want to thank my colleagues for, this wonderful learning experience that I've had this morning from all of their rich contributions. So what I want to say in my 30 seconds will not surprise you. I do want to say that we cannot prioritize or invest in children's spiritual development unless we all become peacemakers. At a broader level, this commitment must also guide our social and political life. And for policymakers and states, this means recognizing, I can't emphasize this because of our contemporary realities, recognizing that war is the direct opposite of the spiritual development of children. Children cannot develop spiritually when they are killed in schools, in hospitals, in playgrounds, when homes are shattered by bombs, and when they witness the deaths of parents, brothers, sisters, and friends. Because war destroys not only lives and communities, but also the child's sense of safety, trust, and meaning. So we have one of the best things that we can do coming from our religious spaces of meaning is uniting in a single voice to speak out against and take a public stand against the violence of war perpetrated on fellow human beings.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think also this beautifully concludes our webinar today. I know we are a bit out of time. I do hope that this session helps many of you somehow to demystify what spiritual nurture means and to really relate it close to our hearts and our souls. These are not very much theoretical concepts, but I hope we showed you today how these have very practical implications in the life of millions of children, how everyone can play a role, how we do need to start from our own presence and ourselves and become peacemakers that are also able to speak about peace and unite and stand together against violence, as Professor Ramachan said, as this is the first precondition to really develop an environment of love and positive relationships that can help the flourishing of children and ours and their spiritual nurture as well. So I really thank all the speakers. It has been an honor and a pleasure to moderate this session. And I thank all the participants that have connected. Apologies, we couldn't get to all the questions, but hopefully we've shared enough resources in the chat. And we will be sending this recorded video as well as sharing all the resources in our follow-up email. So thank you so much. Please, you saw the link for the summit in June, so we really hope to stay connected and see many of you contributing in those sessions as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Goodbye. It's so wonderful being with all of you. Thank you so much. I learned a lot from all that you said. Thank you so much. It was so enriching. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, what a pleasure to be with you all. This is lovely, really beautifully done. And Eleonora, you're you're fast. I appreciate how much you were able to sort of grab the fruit and cut it up for us after each time. Beautiful. Yeah.
Indeed.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Really a pleasure to be with you all. I'm honored.
Pleasure to
Thank
be
you.
with you all.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Take care.